Hi, welcome back to Uproarious. I'm Rory, and today we're going to talk about video games like Tetris and how they can change your relationship with your brain. So you might have already heard of Tetris being used for PTSD. Time and other news publications ran a number of articles over the last couple of years talking about how PTSD has been treated using Tetris even years after the fact. My first response was skepticism when I saw these articles being published, and that's simply because most of them pointed back to the exact same study or didn't point back to a study at all. They just said researchers have found or something like that without crediting the actual paper. So what I did is I went back to that paper from 2017 and then found another one from 2015 and checked out the work by those authors and where their resources were for those papers. And it turns out this research is much older than the current coverage would suggest. Probably the most interesting thing that I found is the very strong parallel between the use of Tetris and the use of EMDR therapy. EMDR therapy is a reprocessing therapy where you consider a memory and then you perform a task to help you reduce the intensity of that memory. The use of Tetris in these studies seems to reflect the EMDR model. You think about a traumatic event, or you have just experienced a traumatic event, and then you play Tetris for a bit, and then you move on, and you don't think about it anymore. And then the studies have them do this over time, and then follow up with them at the end of that period, and then later they check in on them again to see if the symptoms were relieved long term. The thing that I found among all of these different studies as far as whether or not it works is that it works regardless of who you are. So we look at men who have been in combat situations and have combat PTSD. We look at parents who have lost children through traumatic illness. We look at people who have delivered babies and had emergency C-sections and then used this directly afterwards or in the months following to reduce the trauma response associated with that delivery. All of these are trauma-based, anxiety-based, depression-based, and that's great, actually, because those are some of the things that are hardest to treat without medication. And we're finding that there are ways to treat them both with and without medication that improve overall prognoses. First, let's talk about why this works and what the mechanisms are behind this so that you can find solutions that work for you. The first thing you need to know about a memory is that you're going to build it in stages over time. Your first impression of an event makes what's called a labile memory. And a labile memory can also be described as a flexible memory or short-term memory that is not concretely recorded in our brain yet. When we're in this process, it's very easy to get distracted and for our brain to drop parts of that memory. The second stage of this is where we start to make more rigid memories, and this is where we're packing down a memory to its bare essentials, only keeping the information that our brain thinks will be really important, and then storing that away for later use. This stage is really important because those memories can live for quite a long time like that, as long as we don't think about them or access them. Eventually, if we don't ever access them, they'll go away. But if we are dealing with a traumatic memory, one of the things that will happen is that we will access that memory and re-record it over and over and over again. And that's the third stage of a memory, is re-recording. When we reprocess a memory, when we think of a memory, we pull it out of our brains and we unpack it as much as we can, and we go, oh, okay, here's that memory, and then we pack it back up and put it away again. And what that means is that our original memories are lost and we're always making a new memory of an old memory. We never remember something exactly the way it was the first time we ever thought of it. We always think of the last time we thought of it. So if we can change our associations in that moment, we can change the way that that memory affects us, even if it's been years since the original event. Scientists used to think that the more we thought about a memory, the more permanent it became. But what is actually true is the more we reinforce a memory in the same way, the more it seems that way. But if we reinforce it in a different way, we can actively change that memory. And that's what we're aiming to do here. So the base mechanism that we're going to deal with is changing a memory. When we're playing these games, our goal is to distract ourselves while we are doing that reprocessing stage so that our brain kind of lets go of some of the parts of that memory so that it's less intense. So let's talk about how to actually implement this. If you have Tetris already installed on your phone or pulled up on your computer, all you need to do is when you have a troubling memory or impulse or urge to do something, stop and play Tetris for 15 minutes. And I say 15 minutes because that's the period of time most of the studies actually studied. You might need more or less time than that, and that's fine. You just do what works for you. But 15 minutes is what the studies all did. Once you've played your game for 15 minutes, if it was an intrusive thought or a troublesome memory, you don't need to revisit it. It may have gone away. If it's still there, then you can deal with it the way you normally would. If it's an impulse, an OCD ritual, something like that, that you were just delaying in that process, you might find that your urge is less, but that you still want to do it, and that's fine too. This isn't something that works the first time you do it. It works over time as you build new associations and things. The reason that this is so powerful is that we can kind of just decide how we want to feel about any given memory and reprogram that memory to be what we want it to be. So, for example, if I think of a birthday that didn't go exactly how I hoped it to, and so on that day I was upset. But there were a lot of good things about that day, and I do appreciate things about that day, so I don't want to be upset when I think of that day. What I want is to remember the good things. What I would do in this situation with EMDR is think of that birthday, talk about the things that I really liked, and talk about why the things I didn't like really don't matter. And then I do the EMDR therapy of following lights and listening to sounds and things like that. If instead of doing EMDR, one plays Tetris, which I have tried many times and I actually really enjoy, and I've seen a similar effect. You think of the memory, you consider what you like about it, what you dislike about it, or what's not important about it. And then as soon as you thought, these are the parts that aren't really important, go directly into playing Tetris for 15 minutes. What that does is it gives your brain like a lingering memory of going, oh, these parts aren't important. And your brain will go, oh, if those parts aren't important, maybe I don't need to record them in great detail anymore. In this way, we can take very rigid and difficult memories and make them more plastic, more elastic, and less intense and less jarring. And ultimately, we can reduce symptoms of PTSD from any number of situations. We can reduce depression, anxiety, impulses, rituals from OCD, you name it, all through this one technique where we just distract ourselves when we have very strong urges. So if you want to use Tetris as part of your own healing and journey for managing symptoms, I have a few suggestions. The first thing to do is to get a journal. You want to record data so you know whether or not it's working for you. The second thing that I would do is make a plan. Say you're going to do it for a month or 2 months or 3 months or 6 months, however long you think is a good period for you to try it. And then at the end of that, evaluate it. And the reason for this is because it's hard to see change when it's incremental, but it's much easier to see change overall if you can look back at data over time. For your journal, you're going to want to include things like how intense your symptoms were before you started the exercise, how long you played Tetris for, and how intense your symptoms were after you played Tetris. And then you might mark whether or not that thought or urge came back in the same day. And early on, it might not relieve it very much, or that thought might come back as soon as you're done playing Tetris, and that's fine. Just record the data accurately. Over time, what you might see is that you've improved. And if you're not improving, you can just stop. Tetris isn't a medication that has to be started or stopped under the supervision of a doctor, so you can always stop if it's not working for you. But again, making sure you collect data on that so that you know whether or not this is working for you is a really important part of that. I do want to make a point to say that this can't replace a therapist, including an EMDR therapist, because therapists are licensed individuals who are trained in helping you reprocess a memory and understand things with better perspective. And Tetris isn't that. No video game is a replacement for that. But if you don't have access to a therapist, or you can't always reach your therapist, or your therapist just says that you need more tools to use for independence or whatever, Tetris can be a very useful tool for that. Again, I'm not a therapist and I'm not a doctor, so do consult your therapist or doctor if they're available. But I think it's vaguely safe to say that trying to play video games when you're upset isn't going to be a harmful thing for you to try on your own. But none of the studies do account for people who are currently in crisis or in pain or dealing with addiction. So do keep in mind that this may not be the solution for everyone. Hey, thanks for checking out my video. If you like this video about Tetris, check out the link in the description below for more information. Thanks again for stopping by, and remember to be kind to yourself and others.